Hello everyone. Welcome. Jacobson is my name, in case you didn't know. And though names don't change, but hopefully our spirits and our energies and our vibes are always on the move, always growing and vibrant and not static, which is a perfect segue to the discussion in this class, which is about dissonance. Any of you familiar with the concept or the experience of dissonance? You know what the word means? Dissonance. So the title is The Power of Dissonance. How strong are your comfort zones? So I remember the first time I traveled to Arizona, which has become a pretty affluent retirement village, and I saw towns named, like Comfort Zone, Arizona. I don't know if there's actually that one by that name, but that type of those names given very much from a marketing point of view, trying to entice people that this is like your comfortable place to be, I guess, until you make the next transition. It rubbed me the wrong way. Imagine someone saying, "Come live in Pleasantville," or what are the other names there? Like, anyone get? I can't even remember some of the names. But basically, all in the category of Comfort Zone, USA. Okay, and when Mark Twain said that he would like to live his last years in Manchester because it would make the transition to death easier. Why he chose to insult Manchester this way, I guess anyone that travels there probably knows why. It's very industrial and very much conducive to, as I said, preparing you for the next stage. Well, even though we all like comfort zones to some extent, they also happen to be our undoing. Though it's not good to generalize, but if you could pinpoint the root of most problems in life is not that we have dissonance, but the fact that we have a problem with dissonance. Let me translate what dissonance means, just in case you're not aware. It's used in different contexts. It's used in musical context, in science type of context, and of course in psychological context. The classic term is cognitive dissonance, which is the fable from one of the fairy tales, The Fox and the Grapes. Classic story of a fox who's drawn to the smell of these luscious grapes, but the grapes are out of reach of the fox. So the fox attempts and tries everything possible to reach these grapes, but as much as he tries, you cannot. So finally, he gives up, but instead of giving up and just saying he can't reach the grapes, he must say he comes to the conclusion that the grapes have to be sour. From there we have the word sour grapes. In other words, instead of him adjusting to the reality that he just can't reach the grapes, he had to dismiss the grapes as being something that is not good enough. And that's why he couldn't reach it. This is a classic psychological thing that most people do, many people do, that when something doesn't work your way, instead of you adjusting to the reality, you adjust the reality to your perception, and you actually can even change how you see things. Which really comes down to this: if you hear something you don't like, what do you do? Do you dismiss it? Do you challenge it? Or do you actually listen, and maybe there's some point there? Now, of course, there's also the other extreme, people who are always vulnerable to every type of critique, and every time someone says something to them, they're constantly second-guessing themselves. So this, of course, is a dilemma that we deal with on a daily basis. The balance between self-confidence and arrogance. The balance between self-esteem and knowing when to listen, perhaps made a mistake. Jeff here, as I walked into the class, said he called me because he thought I maybe need help. So I told him I'm healthy enough to ask for help when I need it. Just using you as a scapegoat. I hope all of you are healthy enough to ask for help when you need it. But unfortunately many don't, because they feel if they ask for help it makes them seem weak, makes them seem incompetent, unable to solve a problem. So this is of course, Hillel's famous line, Imenani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And then, of course, the second line, which is as equally critical, is if I'm nila atzmi, if I am for myself, ma'ani, what am I? Which seemingly contradict each other. Are you for yourself, or you're not for yourself? If you're not going to be for yourself, if you won't be for you, who will be for you? And if you're only for yourself, what are you? And then, of course, the third line I should add, if not now, when? Which, if you give it some thought, maybe the third line answers the question. In other words, there is a balance between reliance and the need to be able to turn to others. But on a deeper level, dissonance takes the place of all the different conflicts that we have and the detachments that we have in life. When things happen to us often that are very painful, we disassociate ourselves from it, we detach. Extreme of this is what they call an out-of-body experience, which has been documented as being something that is natural to the immune system. The fact that children are able to experience it because children don't have sophisticated tools. When something really horrible happens to a child, God forbid, and especially if it's persistent, a child will have out-of-body type of experience, meaning it will detach from the experience because it's too horrible. So consciously, you almost like move away from the experience like it's happening to someone else, and you're like observing it. And if this is sustained for a while, you actually can develop a different type of character, where there's the character that you really are, that really was hurt, and the character that you've assumed that's protecting itself from not being hurt like that. And there are many reasons why a person would do that, because it may be too difficult to deal with. If it's coming from a person that's supposed to love you, and they're abusing you in a very bad way, God forbid, and no one should know of this, but unfortunately it exists. So it's just too inconceivable to accept. So a person psychologically will do, without even effort, not because they've developed any mechanisms, it's just, I guess, a natural thing that the psyche will do to protect itself. Just like we put up our hand when someone wants to punch us, there's a certain type of reflexive action. What I call it is a type of like a psychological hypothermia. So hypothermia is a phenomenon where, which once upon a time ago, before it was diagnosed, it was happens more. I mean, we have a doctor in the room, so I don't want to say anything that sounds ignorant. So you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Now that I know you're a doctor, I'm intimidated a bit. If I didn't know that, I would just be blabbing off and saying, okay, But let me make it clear: I'm not a doctor, nor am I the son of a doctor, as they say in Hebrew. I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I dabble here and there. So hypothermia is usually happens in a situation where, like, a child will fall, God forbid, under ice, under thin ice or in ice cold water, and the water is so cold that would basically create a situation where you could almost die. Hypothermia is a state where you lose complete consciousness to the point that almost all the vital organs under regular testing will not be functioning. And children, I guess children happens to because of their metabolism or why it happens to them, I guess it could happen to anyone, to the point that they've been medically declared dead. Until, if I recall my reading right, at some point they discovered that these dead children were not dead at all. The body goes into some state of shock that it shuts everything off just to preserve the minimal life force, which is what shock is in general. Even though no one should ever experience it, but it's really a life-preserving element. So anything that happens to a human being, the body, and definitely the soul and the psyche, will go into all kinds of overdrive and all kinds of efforts to preserve life. That's the cardinal rule. So psychologically, dissonance is not necessarily like denial, which is let's call it a distant cousin of dissonance, if we're going to create a hierarchy here, is basically a healthy function to preserve. The place where it becomes unhealthy is when it becomes extreme, and when you're in a safe situation, you maintain the dissonance. So in a situation like that, for example, when a person is running from a fire, and your adrenaline is flowing, and you're very hypersensitive and hyper alert, and you're really doing everything possible because you're desperate. Okay, at that point, it's a lifesaver. But if you maintain that type of hypersensitivity, even when things stabilize, that's when you have the problems. So there are many things in our lives that we've done, intentionally or not, that have saved us. And often those tools are not that very useful when you're in a healthy situation. They're good in an unhealthy situation. You have instances of people who've suffered, again, severe abuse. And I'm using just extreme examples because it makes the point sharper. Is that people who've been hurt, for example, by people they've been loved. So they expect that when someone loves them, they're going to be hurt, and to the point where usually, let's say if I reach out to someone that I like, it's usually seen as a gesture of kindness. But a person who's been hurt, when someone reaches out to them, they almost see it as being ready to be punched. And this happens more often than not. Often couples who one of the partners is in a situation like that, and they react to a loving gesture as like if you're going to hurt them, when that's not at all the intention, because the memory and the reflexive action that a person has developed to protect themselves continues to dominate their lives. So it's a very big challenge. How do you so-called shed those tools that saved your life, the time when a point where you begin to realize you might not need them any longer? So that's a whole other story. Maybe I'll discuss a little later. What I want to discuss is that the fact is we live in a world where, as soon as you live in a world where there's duality, there isn't seamlessness, you immediately have dissonance. You immediately have a disconnect. As soon as we live in a world where expectations of us are one thing, and you may, in your own heart and soul, want something else, right there you have a dissonance. What people expect of you and what you really want. And per se, that is not necessarily a bad thing if you're aware of it. Like it always with all illness, physical or psychic or spiritual. Awarenesses have the cure. The problem becomes when you're not aware, or you convince yourself that something unhealthy is healthy. Like the statement I once heard the Rabbi say, which I thought was very powerful. He said that everyone has flaws, but don't make a philosophy of your flaws. Because once you make a philosophy of it, then it becomes like a legitimate system, And so to recognize we have weaknesses, but suddenly you make a whole philosophy about it, time passes, and now we got ourselves to contend with a whole system, which is all based on some dissonance, some false premise, or some protective tool. And that's a big challenge. I can tell you from my own experience in dealing with people, it's not usually the flaw itself that's the problem, it's that they built a whole system around it. And there's a whole series of conclusions they've come to that the original premise is false. And you can't even retrace the steps any longer because it's now developed into a full-blown life story. So the challenge is, how do you identify that? And how do you get back to the natural state of dissonance before it becomes something that has taken over and we can't even distinguish between the two? So, I don't know if you read the email. I guess if you're here, you read the email because we're in a different location. Those that are not here didn't read the email. So, what can I say? Pavel, did we let them know there that if someone comes here, they should be sent here? Okay, fine. So, I posed there 4 questions, like some type of quiz. One was actually quoting, I'll tell you later who the quote is from, that the best way to, I forget the exact language, but the best way to corrupt the youth is by telling them to like those that are similar to them more than those that are not like them. And the question is, what's your reaction to that type of philosophy, that type of approach? I'd be happy to take some responses if you'd like to respond. And then the other 3 questions were, when you come to a party or to an event, do you choose to speak to people you know, or do you choose to speak to strangers? That was the second one. And the third one is, if you identify a problem or a challenge in your life, how much from 1 to 10 would you say you're the problem? How much do you think someone else is the problem? Or it's out of your control? And I forgot already the 4th one. I remember the Rebbe's words, but I don't remember my own so well. Does anyone remember the 4th one? What was the 4th one? Comfort zone. Something about comfort zones. But anyway, those 3 are good enough. Anybody wish to weigh in, or are you too vulnerable of questions, if I may? Yeah? Okay, fine. It's all right. Remember, the camera's only on me. No one sees you, even if they may hear you. So obviously there's a commonality between all these questions. It really comes down to is how trapped are you in your comfort zone? And how much do you see it as a comfort zone, or how much do you think it's just the way it should be? So, I'll just speak from an intellectual perspective first. One of the great episodes in the Talmud is the story of Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera was a great sage, and he was a master of the Babylonian Talmud. As you may know, after the temple was destroyed, approximately that time is when the Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, known as Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and which was a big thing because for almost 1,000 years, well, more than 1,000 years, the Torah was passed on orally, meaning oral interpretation to teach the student of the written law of the Torah Shebiksav, the written. But they saw that Torah was being forgotten, all that interpretation was being forgotten slowly. So even though it was a prohibition to write down that which had to be memorized, but from there on they began to write it down. There comes a time to preserve Torah. Sometimes you have to do something that the Torah may forbid. This is not a simple matter, but the rabbis, their consensus was that we have to preserve it, so they began to write it down, which what we call today the Talmud, the Gemara. Actually, the Talmud consists of Mishnah and Gemara. It's two generations. Mishnah are the Tanoim. Tanoim are like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, and so on. And then you have the next generation called Amoraim. That's the Gemara. There's the students of the Tanoim. We're talking approximately first century, second century. And then there's the generations afterwards, how the Torah reached us, which is a whole other discussion of the chronology of Torah's Masorah, how it was passed on. The first 40 generations actually is documented by the Rambam in his introduction, if you ever want to look it up, to Mishnah Torah. And even Pirkei Avot really talks about Moshe Kibbutz Torah. Moses received the Torah from Sinai, passed it on to Joshua to the Skenim to the Nevi'im, and so on. So there was a man called Rabbi Zera. As I was saying, so after that point, there were two major academies established. One was called the Babylonian Academy, from which we have Talmud Bavli, which means the Babylonian Talmud, developed in Babylonia, which is basically modern-day Iraq. And there was the second, the Jerusalemite Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi. So it was an academy in Jerusalem that developed as well, and there are many similarities, but these two Talmuds are very different in many ways. The Talmud Bavli was concluded after the Talmud Yerushalmi, so it's the final say, so to speak. But there are two different methods. The Talmud Bavli is far longer and far more extensive than the Jerusalem Talmud, but these are two different, we'll call it intellectual paradigms, different approaches to analyze a problem. So Rabbi Zera was a great sage, and he had studied in the Babylonian academies, he had mastered Talmud Bavli. Then the Talmud says in Bab Metzia, it says that Rabbi Zera went along and wanted to start studying and mastering Talmud Yerushalmi. So he fasted. The two opinions, 40 fasts, 100 fasts. He fasted 40 or 100 fasts in order to forget the Babylon Talmud, in order to be able to begin to retain the Jerusalemite Talmud. That's the story. And he was successful. The question is this. What kind of, you ever hear someone have to fast to forget knowledge? More importantly, knowledge is accumulative. Since when do you have to forget one body of knowledge to accumulate a new body of knowledge? Knowledge grows. Whatever you learned yesterday can be a stepping stone to tomorrow. So why would he want to forget? He could say he wants to fast to merit that the Jerusalem Talmud should be open to him, should be easy to learn. Why did he have to forget? And then there's, of course, the prohibition against doing anything deliberate to forget Torah, which is God's word. To forget God's word is considered a sin. And here he went ahead deliberately to forget. So the many answers given, but the primary answer is that he was not interested in forgetting the knowledge. He was interested in forgetting the methodology, the method of the Babylonian Talmud. So he was not forgetting what he had learned. He wanted to forget the method. What is the difference between the Babylonian method and the Jerusalemite method? In Hasidic and Kabbalistic terminology, there's a difference between what they call Er Chayzer and Er Yashar. Literally, Er Yashar means a direct light. Er Chayzer means a refracted light. Classic example, sunlight is Er Yashar. There's a sun, it emanates light. It's a source of light. The moon is a classic example of Er Chayzer, refracted light, because it doesn't have its own light. It reflects and refracts the light of the sun. So these are two types of light, but they also are two methods in intellectual process. There are those that, for example, approach an idea, challenge, or problem, and they intuitively try to come straight to the solution. That's our Yasher approach. They go straight to the solution, and then they may question it, and so on. And then there's the bottom-up approach. That's from the top down. The bottom-up approach, the refractive approach, so to speak, is where you slowly build it. You begin to analyze it, probe, offer a theory, challenge that theory, challenge it again, counter-challenge. It's a slow, painstaking process, directly antithetical to the first process, because it's filled with doubts and filled with confusion and back and forth arguments. And at the end, the goal is, of course, to get the crystal picture. And you challenge the idea again and again and again. It's completely two different approaches. And not one is necessarily better than the other. They each have their advantage. At the end of the day, the way the scholars explain, obviously the second approach in the long term is a more thorough one. Because the first one, you may miss many things. It's like some people have a grasp. In school you'll have friends, or you know yourself, that are quick heads. They know how to grasp something very quickly. And then there are people who are not such quick minds, but they struggle, and they come to the conclusion. And often, if you study these two, you'll see that the second one, though their brain power may be weaker, but they come to a much more solid and thorough conclusion than the first one. Because the first one is relying on their brain power, and often makes mistakes, and it's almost like a laziness, a lack of thoroughness. Where a person who has to work at it hard and has to pore over the words again and again and again comes to a certain clarity that the first approach is not able to gain. Yet the first approach has a certain type of power because it is ultimately brain power. Imagine having someone who does both. Someone has a lot of brain power and also struggles, and despite their ability to grasp things quickly, make sure that they're very thorough and goes through all those steps. So Rabbi Zera had mastered the Babylonian refractive approach. He wanted to now gain the second approach. And that's why he fasted. Because the fasting would help him not forget the knowledge, the facts, the information he had gathered, but the method. Now why is this an important story? Because you rarely find such type of intellectual curiosity. They say today, psychologists say today, by the time we're age 8, we've already developed the way we solve problems. We may not have all the tools and all the wisdom and experience to solve problems, but the methods we use have already been somewhat become a certain routine. And that's based on how we've observed our parents, we observe friends, society, media, school, and so on. So we have developed already, which makes a lot of sense, because if you look at language, for example, at around age 13 is the cutoff point, where someone who born in one country will learn another language, if they come to the new language before 13 or 14, they usually will not have an accent. After that age, they'll have an accent, almost guaranteed. Not because they can't master the vocabulary and the words and the intelligence, it's because at a certain age, certain things begin to shape and form that are not easy to change later. I'm not saying you can't work at it, but we're talking about naturally. So the same is true psychologically. There are certain patterns, routines, methods that become part of us. So if they're not healthy ones, there you could say, okay, time's come to grow up and start getting beyond your unhealthy tools and learn some healthy tools. But what happens if they're healthy ones? Rabbi Zera had developed a very healthy tool. He knew how to study Talmud Bavli. No one suggests there was anything wrong with his method. Yet because of his search for truth, seeking truth, he did not suffice. He wanted to learn a new method. Can you imagine a new method? This is pretty rare. You rarely find people ready to be open, as I said, to break bad habits, let alone to break a good habit. Why would you want to break a good habit? But he was looking to go beyond himself. That is obviously something to admire. It means that it's not because his life broke down, because he has a problem, or because he's faced a crisis or trauma, but simply in the search for truth, he wanted to master a second method. And that's why fasting was necessary, because you couldn't do it yourself at that age. You needed some divine intervention. Fasting was a form of penitence, a form of deeper tshuva, a form of deeper introspection, etc., etc. I say it because it teaches us that in life, the only way a person grows is when they're able to challenge themselves. If you can't challenge yourself, you will be stuck exactly where you are. Now, we always like our cake and eat it too. We like to say we challenge ourselves, but we really don't want any change. That's how it is. People have an issue, a problem, and that's where dissonance comes in. So dissonance is a very healthy thing. It's telling you that where you are and where you want to be are not consistent, and that bothers you. If it doesn't bother you, you have no dissonance. It bothers you, but what do you do about it? Do you do what the fox did and say, you know what, the thing I really want, I have it already, or it's really not really that important? In other words, or do you actually confront yourself and say, look, I'm not there yet, and let me figure out how to get there? You want to apply this to real life? Apply it to relationships. We live in a time of plenty of crisis with relationships. Everybody wants a relationship, but it's very elusive. It's very elusive. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's very elusive. And the question, as I asked before, is, from 1 to 10, how much are you part of the problem, and how much are others part of the problem? Now, rest assured that even if you are, will pay lip service and say, I'm sure I'm part of the problem, the fact is psychologically, it's always easier to blame somebody else. Especially if there's illegitimacy to it as well. Because the fact is we always minimize our role in things. When there's a problem, there's two people involved. Yes, it takes two to tango, but it's always the other one that's probably a little more of the problem. And I reacted to it, maybe I made a mistake by reacting to it. That's what you hear people acknowledge. But it's very hard to really look at yourself in the face and say, I am repeatedly doing the same mistake. And the important qualification, repeatedly doing the same mistake without being someone that's constantly beating yourself up. People who constantly say, I'm always the one that's at fault, I'm not talking about that either. I'm talking about a healthy set balance, as I said, where you have self-esteem and still you're ready to say, I'm part of the mistake. There's always the other option. There are people who always are blaming themselves first. That's equally problematic because it's also not realistic. So this concept of dissonance really, in a way, captures the story of all our lives. Whatever tension there is, tension means two forces that are not in harmony. That's dissonance. Then if you study the history of music, they say the Greek early music, classical music, was focused primarily on pure harmony. Now here we have a musician in the room. So if I say something wrong, Philip, please correct me. I have to qualify. Are there any physicists in the room? Because I intend to bring something from physics too. So, okay. But we always have online. Look, I have to apply what I'm saying to myself, that I'm open to being corrected. So that's why I'm focusing on that possibility. And I said I'm secure enough to acknowledge if I said something that is wrong or not completely accurate. So music, there is harmony. But then later musicians, and I'm not sure exactly the history of what stage, began to introduce, like in poetry, a certain dissonance. So there's consonance and there's dissonance. And the dissonance is almost like throwing in a certain note that you wouldn't expect. It's almost like grading, but it has a role to play. And there's all arguments between the classicists and the so-called freestylists. Which one is it? Are they both music? Or one is just like, playing around? Because you would think a harmonious flow would be the thing you want to have. You don't want to throw somebody off. But there is music today that, I don't know, some people love heavy metal. And I guess you can acquire a taste for it. I've tried many times, I like music, so I try all types of styles. But you really got to be a little violent spirit to really be able to do, because it has a lot of that type of grading element. So I have no doubt people who have experienced that type of life, I could see that music speaking very much to them. Just like rap has its power, and just like jazz in its good old time, what they call it, the music of the streets. Like, someone said to me, explained to me what jazz was like. It was one of the early classes, Sonny Goldstein. So when I was teaching them what I knew, they were teaching me what they knew. So they brought me to the I remember they brought me a bunch of like 40 albums, those good old days, LPs. And actually, you know what LP is? Long playing, whatever. So it was like it's hard to explain today actually. It's like a big disc, basically, a black disc that we say, like a scratched record, right? Today it's like cliches, but that's what it was. And so they had these, and then there was of course the small ones, with the bigger holes. What were they called? The singles, right? But they were like 45s, right? There you go. So there you go. It exposes your age when you know this well, and doesn't you have to be that old actually to be around 25 years old, 30 years old, a little more than that. It took place around 25 years ago. These changes. So they brought me this whole set, whole collection of jazz music. So I listened to it. I mean, I'd heard jazz before. There's jazz radio and stuff like that. And then I remember someone trying to explain to me. They say, imagine closing your eyes and you're quiet, not a quiet room, in a room on Broadway or on maybe the noisiest corner, I think, is St. Mark's and 3rd Avenue. If anyone ever stayed in the St. Mark's Hotel knows that. Because you have all the streets converging. It's not just like one avenue and one street. It's like all the avenues suddenly coming. So it's basically, I slept there once, Yom Kippur night, just all night with trucks. So they say close your eyes in a room like that and listen to the music of New York streets. That's jazz. You ever hear that description? Okay, well, I guess it's some type of music. For some people more peaceful, maybe. If you don't have a peaceful life, I guess it's very musical. If you have a very peaceful life and live in the country a lot, I don't think that music is going to do a lot for you. The point of the matter is, I'm not getting into now taste of music. The bottom line is that there's harmony and there's harmony. And the truth is real harmony is actually not seamless flow. It's not a one syllable, a monosyllabic structure or a mono musical note. It is a series of forces that have different rhythms, and together they create something that is that's beautiful. And dissonance is very much part of it. In writing, for sure, in any type of artistic expression, there's a thing called tension and resolution. Any good story has a tension and then a resolution. There's some drama involved because there's a problem. What's going to happen? And then there's the resolution of that problem. Any good writing does that, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. It's a form of expression of trying to get from a place. So dissonance and tension is very much part of a healthy balance. The challenge, however, is when there's too much. There's too much tension without resolution, or too much resolution without tension. Too much bliss. So, in truth, you could then go take any story in your life and you can apply this type of formula to it. So let's just look at this week's two chapters that are combined. Chukas Balak are the two chapters we read this week. The 52 chapters of the Torah. There are chapters that are combined. They usually work based on the leap year and how many weeks of the year. So that's how the chapters are split or combined. There are actually, how many? I think 6. There's Vayakal Pekudei, 1 in Exodus, that can be split or combined, Vayakal Pekudei. There are 3 in the book of Vayikra, that is Achrei Kadeshim, Sazria Metzera, and Bahar B'Chukesai, that's 4. There's 2 in Bamidbar, Chukas and Bolok, Matis Masei. So what do we have so far? 6. And 1 in Dvarim, Netzav and Vayelach. So 7. So there's 7 chapters in the Torah that some years are split and some years put together, based on scheduling and so on. So this is one of them. Chukas and Bolak are 2 separate chapters, but they're combined, and we read them with the 7 aliyahs on this coming Shabbos. The central theme in each one of them, well, there's no central in Bolak. There's a more central one. Chukas begins with the story of the red heifer. The red heifer is the mitzvah of Chukas HaTorah, where someone suffers from impurity that's connected to death. So the red heifer is a method that mixing its ash with water is a method of purifying from the impurity of death. This is called chukah. It's one of the super rational mitzvahs that don't make sense. There's no logic to it. As a matter of fact, Rashi even quotes that this is the mitzvah that your enemies, your adversaries will challenge you. What kind of mitzvah is this? What is the impurity of death? And you heal through it, you purify it through the red heifer. The next chapter, Balak, its central theme is the story of Balak and Bilam. The story of Balak was the king of Moab. The Jews were marching through the wilderness on their way to Israel. And as they were getting closer, they drove fear into the hearts of Balak and the surrounding countries, because they saw this nation. They had heard about what happened in Egypt. They heard they were marching through the wilderness, and now they're marching through their land. Imagine a whole nation of who knows how many people. Some say something close to 2 million, even maybe more. Whatever the numbers were, that they're marching through your country. So Moab calls for Bilam, who was the prophet, the Gentile prophet of the time. Actually, he was a powerful prophet, a legitimate one. When it says that there was no prophet that ever rose in Israel like Moses, the Medrash says no prophet in Israel that ever rose like Moses. But outside of Israel, yes, Bilam. So Bilam was basically almost like the alter ego of Moses. He was a true prophet, a divine prophet, but not always with good intentions. He had power. So Balak wants to commission him and sends messengers to him to come and curse the Jewish people. He realized that he's not going to be able to deal with his people on his own, so let's get a spiritual curse on them. And the story continues, an elaborate drama filled with ups and downs, how Balaam wants to do it, but being a true prophet, he's not so simple. He ends up telling Balak that, and I've discussed this episode in different contexts, the whole story with the donkey and so on. He tells Balak, I will do what you ask me, but I can only say what God tells me to say, because that's what you're calling me for. You're not asking me to say what I want to say. You're asking me to curse them for divine power. And God says to him, that's what God says to him to do. And bottom line is, 4 different times, instead of curses coming out of Balaam's mouth, blessings come out of his mouth. So the one that was supposed to curse ends up being the source of blessing, and actually they end up being some of the greatest blessings the Jewish people ever received. Which is interesting, because a similar story happened much earlier with Esav and Jacob, where Jacob and Esav's angel go to battle, the wrestling angel, all night, and when the dawn breaks, the angel says, I want to go, and Jacob says, no, I won't let you go until you bless me. And he asks him, what is his name? He says, Jacob, and I will call you from now on Israel. So here again, the person who's supposed to be the Esav, the enemy of Jacob, ends up giving him the greatest blessing. And the name Israel, what we have today, Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Israel comes from Esav, not from the good angels. It comes from a bad angel, so to speak. And same thing with Balak and Bilam. Who gives the blessing to the Jews, the greatest of all, which we say every morning, mind you. Ma tevu elecha Yaakov, ma tovu. How beautiful are the tents of Jacob, u'mishkanesecha Yisrael, both names, and the dwelling places of Israel. This is blessing stated straight out of the mouth of Bilam, and it gets better and better. Every one of those 4 stages, the blessings get greater, to the point that this is the first place alluded to Mashiach and the end of times. Maimonides writes that where is it alluded to? In Balaam's blessings to the Jewish people is the promise that Mashiach will come and redeem the entire world. Who does this all come from? From Bilam. Now, the end of the story, as usual, no always happy endings. The Torah is not like about a happy end of a movie. There's always problems. So Bilam, his final doesn't go down without a fight. So Balaam basically tells Balak, I can't curse them, but I can give you advice. That's what Balak should have asked for in the first place. He should have asked for advice, and we would never have gotten those blessings. Instead, Balak, he went all the way. He wanted the curse, so he got himself the blessing. So be careful what you ask for. There's one lesson in all of this. But advice, as far as advice goes, Balaam gave him brilliant advice. Balaam said, they cannot be destroyed except if they destroy themselves. I can't curse them. God is not going to allow me to do that. You get them to destroy themselves, and then they're vulnerable. And he says to them, send the beautiful Midianite women, and let them seduce them, and that will be their destruction. And that's exactly what happens, and the chapter concludes with that episode. Zimri, one of the leaders of the Jewish people, Zimri ends up being a desecration of God's name as he defiles God with a Midianite woman in public and so on, until Pinchas comes, and then you have the next episode. But that is for Wednesday Night Live next week, which we'll discuss soon whether it'll be live or not. But that's another story. But the point being is that this is the story with Balak. Now, if you want dissonance, here you got dissonance from every angle possible. So, before I get to this actual, the more detail of it, both these episodes, since they come together in one chapter this week, they have a commonality. The commonality is dissonance. The commonality is a tension. maybe the greatest dissonating force, I can't say dissonate, the greatest force of dissonance in our lives is the fear of death. There are psychologists and thinkers and philosophers say it's the greatest fear of a human being. And even though it doesn't manifest necessarily that you think about it every second, but all other fears are subsets of that. Fear of being disappearing, the fear of being not valued. Well, because deep down inside we all know that there will be a day where we will no longer be here. So some say that is what drives everything we do, to try to leave a mark, to try to show we have some significance. Some go as far as saying that this creates a very deep existential dissonance, because it's like knowing that, right now I'm here, and I think I'm important, and then 500 years from now, will anyone even remember my name? So though, as I said, we don't necessarily consciously think about it, and I'm not here to necessarily start making you think about it, but subconsciously, we think about it. Some people think about it more than others. The Buddhists and Far Eastern, a lot of what their goal is to conquer the fear of death by recognizing that the world of spirit doesn't die, or the other different ways. In other words, once you get rid of that fear, you usually get rid of all other fears. Because you're not afraid of that, then what else is there to be afraid of? What can happen to you? So mortality is at the core of a lot of fears that we have. Now, obviously, people who deal with health issues and so on have it in a more obvious way. But in a subtle way, some say it drives everything. I would say a Jewish perspective on this is not necessarily the case, even though Judaism doesn't say that there isn't such a fear, but Judaism does not see the psyche of a human being driven by the fear of death. But nevertheless, as I said, I don't think it's inconsistent with Torah thinking, because the fact of the matter is, we live in a world where we have many fears. Some are real, some are fantasies, some are real, some are fabricated, but we live in fear. Now, fear, mind you, is not necessarily that trembling fear where you walk down the street and suddenly your heart is pounding because you're afraid of something. Real fear is the one that's silent, completely silent. The one that just debilitates you, the one that does not let you make a complete move. The fear of failure, the fear of maybe there's a different option that would be better, the fear of being rejected. These are quiet fears. They're not loud. They're not necessarily, as I said, a fear of. As a matter of fact, some of the most fearful people in this world are also the most fearless. Now, if you want me to explain that, or it's self-understood, I'll explain it just in case. Because their real fears have made them feel fearless about everything else. So the fact that they're fearless in certain areas doesn't mean they're not. It means that their fears are so deep that everything else, more superficial, they're fearless about. People who have gone through difficult trauma in life can have that. They're very deep-lying fears, but on an outer level, nothing phases them. But should never be confused that this person is very courageous, because it does give you an impression that a person like that seems like, fearless. When you see fearlessness, rest assured, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's probably some very deep fears there too, that are very much concealed. Because a way of protecting your fears is to become fearless in every area that you could become. It's like the bark is more powerful than the bite. The sizzle and the steak concept. People are very good at the sizzle. They're very good at the fireworks. When you cut to the essence of it, not necessarily. So, fear is a force that's very difficult to speak about, because most of it is not even known to us. But it's also part of dissonance. It's part of dissonance. The way Judaism or Jewish mysticism would put it, and I'm taking it now from Ayin Beis, since that's been the operative source, at least for me, studying it now in the centennial, that we're 100 years from when it was delivered in 1912. And as I've said many times, it's extremely far-reaching and revolutionary stuff in there. So in this week's chapters, both Chukas and Balak, that year it was separated. In 1912 there were two chapters.
Calendar says it's separated this year too.
This year? We don't read Chukas Balak this chapter? You sure? In Israel or here?
I could show you.
Okay. I stand corrected. There you go. I thought it was going to be music. Now you're giving me the parsha. That's my domain. If that's the case, that's the case. I'm almost sure that they come together. But anyway, 1912 for sure they were separate. They were separate this year, great. Chukas Bolok. So I'm talking about Chukas. So the discourses in Ayin Beis, and these chapters discuss the theme. I wouldn't say directly of dissonance, but let me just phrase it in the context, because it can help understand things. In Ayin Beis, I trust you. If it says it, it says it. 1912 or 2012?
You taught me to always give sources.
No, great. That's great. So, in the discourse of, like I said, 100 years ago, this centennial discusses something I began last week discussing, and let me sum it up. The power of Ayin Beis is that what it does is, it's like the difference between symptomatic medicine and medicine at its root. Dealing with the symptoms are at the root. Like when you want to really get to the bottom of an issue, you like to take an X-ray and see what it's like at the core. And in the case of Ayin Beis, that's what it does. It dissects the basic building blocks of existence. So it doesn't speak about things necessarily on a symptom level. It speaks about it on the core level. Real building blocks. What shapes existence? What defines existence? But when you understand it that way, what it helps it sheds light on our lives in a very fundamental way. Like this whole discussion of dissonance really comes down to this. We begin our lives, everything is from the bottom up. What I mean by that is, no one has given us a blueprint or a roadmap to what life ahead is going to present itself. What is coming up ahead of the road. It's not like you have a roadmap and say, here are the roads that you're going to be traveling on, and prepare yourself, this road will twist and turn, ups and downs. We come into the world, we're basically thrown into this world, and figure it out. So I'm not talking about necessarily a prophecy, a prophetic vision of what the future is, but even some type of sense of what life is all about. We basically go day by day. We have no clue what tomorrow will bring. That's a given. But we also don't necessarily know whether we even have the tools to deal with what tomorrow will bring. So we're born into this world. If we have a healthy home and family, they will help us build confidence, develop tools, approaches, certain healthy mechanisms to cope and deal with things. If they're not that healthy or something in between, so we come out with some tools, some lacking tools, Everyone's got their story. And then at some point, you begin to interact. So of course, at a young age, we interact in preschool or kindergarten with the kids in our class. But then, as we develop and to adolescents and adults, teenagers and adults, we begin to have what's called more serious relationships. We begin to become more self-aware. There's that age, whether it's 16 or 17, where you become self-aware. You suddenly realize, hey, all these guys in my class, I'm not necessarily stuck with them. I may have different perspectives. You stop being so much of less dependent on those around you. You begin to start thinking for yourself. And it could be even a terrifying time in a person's life, because what do you do with this newfound awareness? For some people it's very threatening. It's like being thrown out. Now you're out on your own, so to speak. But as time passes, we cope. And here again, how will we cope will depend a lot on our existing tools, on what we were prepared for, who our support system is like, who they are and what they're like, and the other factors that come along. Unfortunately, we may meet the wrong type of person, being vulnerable and not prepared, you can get into real trouble. If you're lucky and you meet the right type of people, it can save your life. Again, there's no real script here, because it's you see people growing up with very good circumstances, almost all the cards stacked for them, and things go wrong. And sometimes the other way around. So I can't really describe and write a script and say this is the script we all go, but we all will go through these challenges. But one thing common denominator that we all do have is we're clueless. We're clueless. Like what is this life that brings? What is it? So as I said, if we had healthy parents, that will have helped tremendously. If you didn't, what are you doing then? Who's supposed to be where do you get your guidance from? So It's such an obvious question that people, who is a 17-year-old supposed to get guidance from when they have a dilemma? And most will not turn to their parents, especially if it's a serious personal. Where are they supposed to go to? Okay, so again, if they're lucky, they find a good mentor, great. But we know that's not always so. That's not as it's easier said than done. And then there are all those people that claim to be mentors, and they end up hurting the people much worse than if they didn't have a mentor in the first place. Not even getting into other forms of abuse and so on. So, in Judaism, this is the reason why the Torah is considered to be the greatest gift in life. Because the Torah is supposed to be that guide. And meant to be an operator's manual for life, given to us by the one who created life. And when Torah is read properly, it's meant to be an X-ray of your soul, an X-ray of your faculties, of your structure, the DNA of your being. And as such, when you study it, it's meant to illuminate, not necessarily what's going to come, but the tools that you have when you deal with a situation. What should you do? Now, tell me which yeshiva teaches the Torah this way. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, period. But that is what the Torah was given for. Simple as that. It's not a book of rules. Rules are secondary. Rules are how you play the music. But first you have to know it's music. First you have to know that it's meant to illuminate yourself and illuminate your skills to teach you how to deal with situations. How do you know? You meet something. What is this? Is this good for me? Is it bad for me? And I don't mean the obvious thing, is it poisonous candy or is it healthy? That, you ask a doctor, you're a little seichel, you think about it. Bigger things, bigger issues. How do I deal with my sexuality? Something everyone has to deal with at some point. How do I deal with my feelings? What is a healthy feeling? What's not a healthy feeling? What's right to do? What's wrong to do? And again, I'm not talking about a Torah now imposing itself and saying, you must do this, don't do that. We're talking about a Torah that's illuminating. The Torah, above all, is called Torah, an illuminating light. It's like the headlights of a car in a dark road. It doesn't change the road. It doesn't change the car. It doesn't change what's on the side of the road. But it lets you see the paths. So imagine traveling down a road without the light and one with the light. The light does not change the realities, but the light lets you see this is a road, this is a ditch, this is a bad place to go, this is a good place to go. Now, we would wish that the Torah would be taught to children this way, and as they turn into teenagers, adolescents and teenagers, they would have this tool. To say that it's not taught at all, I can't say that, but primarily in this type of way that I just described, it would change the whole world if everybody was taught such a Torah. It would be basically a gift that comes along with you in life. As you grow, you have an operator's manual. Imagine buying a machine and you have no idea how to use the machine. Imagine buying a machine, coming home, opening the box, great machine, it looks beautiful, and there's no guide. You don't know what buttons to press, what buttons not to press. That's what the Torah is all about. So in Ayin Beis, which is of course we call Primis HaTorah, the inner dimension, it talks not about the mechanics, it talks about the engineering. What is the engineering like? So in these chapters that was, as I said, delivered 100 years ago, the analogy that it uses is one of letters and a word. If you look at the world around us, it's basically, using a metaphor, is like scattered letters. Scattered letters. What are scattered letters like? They have the potential to be a word and to be a phrase and to be a story and a narrative, but on their own, they're just scattered. Our lives are like that. Our lives are made up of disjointed components and fragments, and we don't see the connection between them initially. The goal of life is for you to take the details of your life and turn it into a story. Turn it into a flowing harmony. Even the contradictory elements of it. But because we live our lives from moment to moment, and the pressures of existence and survival are so dominating, so overwhelming, we can't always see the forest from the trees. You can't see the words, you see the letters. So imagine someone wrote a book. Beautiful book. Then took the book and tore the pages. And not only that, then they tore each page, and to the point where you only have a letter, and all the letters are torn apart. And took it and scattered it all over Earth. So now you have a whole book all over Earth, but it's all a bunch of single letters. And imagine, what would you do? if you were told that that's the story of your life? Well, you start figuring out how to gather those letters together and try to find out what the story is. This is an example for what we call Shvirat HaKelim in Kabbalistic terminology, where energies and containers were together and then they shattered and they were scattered. That's not actually the analogy he gives in Ayin Beis in this section. He uses it elsewhere. Here it's more the idea that a word has meaning, and when you look at the individual letters, you don't necessarily see the meaning. He uses the example of Baruch. Baruch is a Hebrew word that means blessing. Okay? Blessing is one of the most powerful things, to have a blessing, to be blessed. Who doesn't want to be blessed? Baruch, Atah, blessed. So Baruch is made up of 4 Hebrew letters, Beis, Reish, Vav, and Chaf. When you teach a child letters, the alphabet, you teach them Beis, Reish. You may show them in a Chumash or in a Siddur, in a prayer book, in a holy book, the word Baruch, but they don't yet know what the word means. They only know the letter. You say, see this first letter, Beis? This is a letter Beis. The second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It looks like a box, 3 lines, and you teach a child how to write it. And they write it again and again and again, and how to pronounce it. Beis is ba, bi, ba, so on and so forth. Like A, B. A is Aleph, and B is Beis. In the Hebrew alphabet, English alphabet, the first letters, very obvious, the similarities. The rest are also. But A, B is very clear. A, B, Aleph, Beis. So then you teach this child the next letter, Reish, then Vav. At this point, the child has no clue that these are all made up of one word, even though the child is looking at the word, doesn't even know what a word is. It's just learning what a letter is. Then as the child grows in intelligence, it begins to learn that these letters make up a word. And when you put Beis, Reish, Vav, and Chaf, it's more than the sum of the parts of 4 letters. It now means bracha. And you can write entire volumes on what the meaning of blessing is. So this is an analogy to explain life. Life is individual, distinct experiences. Or the way he describes it is distinct spheres, the Essa spheres, the 10 spheres. The structure of existence is made up of distinct structure. You have a brain in your mind, you have the power of vision in your eyes, you have the power of hearing in your ears, you have the power of movement or writing in your hands, in your heart pumps blood, emotions. So every part of a structured human being is made up of structure. It's absolute defined structure. The way he puts it is energy inside of a container. If you look at only one piece of the structure, it's a letter. If you look at how it's part of a bigger picture, it's more than just a word. It's a book. So if you look at the human body, you see a book. You don't see letters. A healthy body is made up of many components, many pieces, but they're all working in harmony. Where does dissonance take place? Dissonance takes place when the parts don't recognize that they're part of a whole. And that's exactly how life was, how we were created. We were created with a fundamental fact was concealed from us, that the details of our lives, we're not aware they're part of a whole. And even when we're told, and it makes sense to us, you still live the moment. You still live piece by piece by piece. And that is essentially the root of all dissonance, is because the part does not know it's part of a bigger picture. And that creates a dichotomy and a dissonance. Because the part senses that it's part of something bigger, but it feels frustrated because it doesn't know how to get there. If you wish, you can say it's the tension of a structured system seeking, yearning for transcendence. So we're bound, in a sense, like by the gravitational pull of life. I don't just mean physically, I mean metaphorically, conceptually. And yet, there's something about us that is restless, that wants more, that wants to find something beyond. This, in Hasidic terminology, is essentially the root of all challenges and also the root of all solutions. Because the yearning is a very healthy component. The yearning is the awareness that there's a problem, or else we wouldn't yearn. If we get complacent and comfortable with the dissonance, and we cease to be restless. So the restlessness is really like a wake-up call that's telling us that there is something going on. But he continues, as he explains this more in depth, he goes deeper into the concept. He speaks about where's the root of who's the author of this book. So it's not just that all the letters of our lives are connected to with each other in a story, they're also connected to an author. Someone wrote this story. So, basically, if you go into the mind of the author or the artist, what does the book look like inside the mind of the artist? That's not that much harder to understand. It's one thing to know that a book is a story, and we only know pieces of it, or we fragments, or just the letters. But inside the artist's mind, inside the cosmic author's mind, it's not even a book yet. It's a vision. It's a vision of something that is beyond any details. And here's where the real so-called mystical quandary takes place. Can we connect not just the letters to the book, but the book to the author, and not just to the author, but to the author that could have written infinite amount of books? In other words, think about an artist. So an artist before he or she envisions a particular type of art, a particular image, has the capacity to create all kinds of art. If it would be an infinite artist, it would be infinite images. But then at some point, the artist or the author chooses and says, I'm going to tell this particular story. I'm going to capture this particular image. So suddenly from infinite possibilities becomes one possibility. But it's the same artist that's able to do so much more, is chosen to now chose one story. The story of your life and my life is that story. And the challenge in Ayin Beis, he wants to not just connect the story to the book, but to the author and all the other possibilities that the author was able to conceive. So we don't just connect the finite structure of our existence to the root of the finite, but also to the root of the infinite. Now this may sound a little esoteric, so I'll elaborate a bit more about this. In the big question that thinkers and philosophers and mystics definitely have always been dealt with is, how high can a human being reach? I mentioned before the fear of death. We are mortals. Can we ever really experience immortality? Or are we doomed to do whatever we do in the little time that's allotted to us, the little playground that we're given, and then it's over? So obviously, the entire Judaism is based on the principle that God created the human being in the divine image, and just like the divine is immortal, there's a part of immortality inside all of us. And that, yes, a part of us may die, but that part is just an insignificant part. The primary part of a person never dies, which is their soul. The fact that we are afraid of death is because we're not soulful people. So we live on the material level, and the material level, we're terrified if something's taken away from us. A soulful person can never have fear, a truly soulful person, because nothing can be taken away. There's nothing you can do to kill a soul. When the Frierdiker Rebbe, whose birthday, his 132nd birthday, is this Yud Beis Tammuz, this coming Monday, and also the 85th anniversary of his liberation. So he was a great Rebbe, sixth Chabad Rebbe, lived in Russia in the harshest times under Stalin, and when the communists decided to wipe out all of Judaism there, he defied them. Long story, he was arrested. And in those days you got arrested, it wasn't just some type of simple matter. You go through and get a lawyer, you get yourself out of there. There was no such thing. There was only prosecution, there was no defense. And basically they could kill anyone at will. And he was constantly at the threat, but he chose to defy them even in prison. Many ways that he just decided to just fight with them psychologically. He did not give one a compromise, even an iota. So there's a classic story that I've shared many times, but it just captures the people he had to deal with. Unfortunately, were mostly Jews, but the Jewish anti-Semites are the worst. These were called the Yefsektia. The Yefsektia were the Jewish communists, the Jewish Communist Party, who made it their passion to wipe out everything that any type of Jewish religion. It was their war. Now, why Jews would go to war against religion, we could all analyze. You want to be neutral? Fine. You don't want to believe. Why you have to go ahead and kill your brothers and sisters who are believers? Even if you want to say they're primitive, dismiss them. Why are you so afraid of them? But that's another therapeutic discussion, but here it wasn't just therapy, here it was talking about life and death. So this year, sex year, were out to get the Rebbe because they knew, as Jews, they knew that he was the threat. Because they knew that they could not conquer him and his spirit. So they thought they can get rid of him, kill him, the spine and the backbone of the Jewish people in Russia would be broken. But they had to deal with a Rebbe that was a little more complicated than they thought. And now, mind you, many of these Jews happened to be grandchildren of Hasidim. So they actually knew who this Rebbe was very personally. To the point when they came to arrest him, one of them said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, said to him, Rebbe, in Yiddish, they spoke fluent Yiddish, Rebbe, just like my grandfather used to carry your grandfather's bags, let me carry your bags. And the Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, your grandfather carried my grandfather's bags where my grandfather wanted to go. And you want to carry my bags where you want me to go, that not. And that was his attitude. The constant bantering. To the point where he refused to speak Russian, though he was fluent in Russian. He refused to cooperate. He put a tefillin on. He fasted. All kinds of things that he did. And he was tortured and beaten. Finally, one of them became so frustrated, they pointed a pistol to his head and said to him, Rebbe, in Yiddish, this thing here has made many people change their mind. It's time to start cooperating. Something to find out who's the master here and who's the subordinate. And the Rebbe looked at him without flinching and said, this toy, meaning the pistol, can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds, or two worlds. That's what he said. And then the man continued and said, okay, Rebbe, we'll see who will prevail. And the Rebbe said, yes, we'll see. And what did we see? That this man ended up being killed by Stalin, and as all of them were killed. And the Rebbe was released, came to the United States, and I wouldn't be sitting here had he not stood up to that man. So who prevailed? So generally speaking, we don't see anything. Talk about a story. If you were there, you would have written a different end for the script, because we know very little about the big picture. And the previous Rebbe saw a bigger picture, and he knew that you cannot vanquish the spirit, because even if God forbid they killed him, they wouldn't have killed the spirit, because he didn't. They would have physically killed him. They wouldn't have gotten him to give in willingly. Well, who wins when you have a situation like that? So I don't want in any way find any redeeming factor in the Holocaust. But who ultimately prevailed today in 2012? The Nazis or the Jews? And they ended up killing 6 million of us. We didn't kill 6 million of theirs. But whose spirit is still alive? And who's driven to make sure they'll have children and grandchildren? And anyone that's a Nazi grandchild hides their identity today, whatever they believe or don't believe. And we go to Berlin, and I've been there, and you see Hanukkah in the Brandenburg Gate there, where Hitler, Yimach Shemai, stood once, and for hundreds of thousands of his whatever you want to call him. And today you see a big Hanukkah menorah in the center. You start thinking, and you see little Jewish children running around with tzitzis and payas, and you hear Holocaust survivors saying, "This is our revenge." Our children, our grandchildren, not our armies and not our firepower. Spirit cannot be destroyed, period. Jews always knew that, and that's why they're here. That's why Mordechai wouldn't bow down to Haman, even if Haman would have killed him. Because bowing down to Haman would have been a bigger death than physical death. It would have been spiritual death, and spiritual death is far worse than physical death. Even though many people have given up many of their standards and values just to protect their own skin, but those people are dead. Once they die, their souls die. It's far worse than a body that dies. Because the body dies, the body is not here, but then there's the children. And there's the legacy. What legacy does a person leave when they've given up their values? Even if nobody knows, but they know. So to go back to the story of the dissonance and the whole story of the letters, the bottom line is, going back to what the Rebbe said, there's no fear because he has many worlds. For him, the soul, spiritual worlds are reality. Now, can you expect from people like us to have it to that extent? Probably not. But a taste of it, we can all expect. A taste of it. The bottom line comes down to this. Why are some people just selfish? And everything is about me, me, me. And there's some people who are just giving. And you see it, and you sometimes wonder, why is it so difficult to just be a kind person? You see people who are just bitchy all the time. and it's unpleasant to be around. They got all kinds of stuff. And then you see people just a pleasure to be with. Same human beings. So good, we can start analyzing, it's probably their parents were this way, and stuff like that. But people are human beings. We all have the ability to rise and transcend even our own personalities. It really comes down to, I would say the formula is how soulful a person is. If you are into yourself, too much into yourself, it means your life is defined by your letters, and that's about it. There is no bigger story. You're definitely not connecting to the author of the story. You're definitely not connecting to the author's other possibilities. But when you're a person who is not worshiping your letter and your moment and your fragments, and you're looking for somewhat of the connecting dots, what makes the letters a word, and what's the story? Then you look for what the intention of the author of the story is. And then you go further, you want to say, what other stories has this author written? And you start discovering there's other human beings who are really part of your story as well. And it's all connected. Then you have transcendence. This essentially is defining what a spiritual life is about. What is your priority? You wake up in the morning. What are you driven that day to accomplish? Most people, it's based on immediate needs. Whether it's money, whether it's aggravation, whether it's therapy they need, whether it's someone to get even with, or whether it's someone some people like to be haunted by demons. I'm not saying no one likes it, but some people are addicted to their demons. So everyone can fill in the dots of what the answer to that is. When you wake up in the morning, what are you driven to achieve today? It's a pretty simple question. And more often the answer is not something that we'll be very proud of, because it's usually very myopic, very focused at the moment. A soulful person, if you ask the Friedrich Rebbe what he's driven in the morning, without missing a beat, he would say, is to bring some soul into this world, to see the bigger picture, to help other people see it. And this is not just a Rebbe's role, this is the role of every soul. Because a soul thinks about the story, it doesn't think about letters. It just thinks about the story. And a story right away brings you emancipation and transcendence to a bigger sense of the world. So you say, it sounds so beautiful what I'm saying, so why is it that nobody can just embrace it? Why is that? Okay, I heard it, now why don't I just do it? Because you don't underestimate how trapped you are in your routines. This could all sound beautiful, poetic even, romantic, but your bottom line is you're trapped by your life. And your life is details, and the details control your life. And the dissonance is there, that's why you feel restless, but you're almost helpless to do anything about it, because you're trapped and you're in your comfort zone, and it's easier the known evil than the unknown, so to speak. And to break that is far harder than anyone can imagine. So you can hear this, and you can imagine, that would be beautiful if I could live my life that way. But you're going to find every excuse why not. You're going to say, well, second, that's good for people who are making a living. Once I make enough money, I can start thinking about my soul. That's one answer that many people will give. Let me first find the financial security. Then we'll deal with other things. Now, I'm not here to rebut that type of response. If you can't find a rebuttal yourself, what should I tell you? The point of the matter is that security is only one security. You either have spiritual security, or you have no security. Finance is not security. It's a sugar-coated candy that can keep you maybe going for a while. It doesn't bring you happiness. It creates the illusion of it. So the point I'm making here is that until a person is ready to make that shift into some type of different way of thinking, it's almost impossible to really grow. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can't find short-term solutions and we can get out of our particular place. But if you're talking about a long-term shift, it's a shift of consciousness that moves away from a letter way of thinking to a word way of thinking. From containers to energy. And from energy to higher energy. And to the point where you get to the source of the energy. So really, that is what the whole story is about. It's about us living in our lives where we have become disconnected from the source, at least consciously. We sense there's something more. We don't really know what to do about it. We're trapped in a life that is, for everywhere you turn, has its tentacles around us, and experiencing this type of dissonance. Often, what happens is when something really gives is when there's a trauma, when there's a real loss, and something really goes wrong. So something that's like a shake-up of the whole thing, and sometimes can get us out of our, wake us up from our reverie. But that's not usually the situation. And more importantly, why wait for such trauma? So, when you study Ayin Beis, what you get is, first of all, a sense of this whole thing. He tells the story. As soon as you read the story, it says, wow, this is exactly the story of life. So immediately is a freeing experience. As I mentioned before, the headlights of the Torah that illuminate the dark roads are exactly that. The fact that you even hear someone tell your story, that you hear, this dissonance I experience, all these challenges. I'm not like a weirdo. This is the story of life. Life was structured this way. That alone is a freeing statement, and then it begins the process of getting out of this type of situation. That's why it says, "En lecha ben cherin, elamisha ezek b'Torah." You don't have a free person except someone who studies Torah. Now, just for the record, it doesn't say someone who studies Torah is free, as I mentioned before about the yeshiva system. But it does say that you can't have it without the Torah. Because what the Torah does is it shines a light that's outside of existence into existence. Einstein said you cannot change a system when you're inside the system. You have to have a light from outside of it. Because ein chovesh materes atzmei, a person who's tied up in fetters, a fettered person cannot unfetter themselves. When you're in a pit, you can't pull yourself out of the pit. You need someone to schlep you out. When you're subjective and you have your limited vision, your limited myopic vision, you need another objective perspective that gives you another way to look at it. So, the Torah is that perspective. You start reading it in a proper way, especially the inner dimension, the Hasidic dimension. You start seeing your life written, almost like you will start wondering, how does anyone know this? And you realize this is the X-ray, this is the DNA of existence. Obviously, each of us have our own particular script, but the basic elements are there. And then that begins the journey of getting yourself freed from this trap. Realizing that the reality that we think is real is very, very, very minuscule. Imagine an ant suddenly discovering there's a whole world beyond the ant. And as much as the distance between an ant and a human being, you can imagine the distance between a human being and the divine and the spiritual. But it's not meant to make us feel like ants. It's meant to make us feel that we can reach great heights when we allow ourselves to understand. So it opens up horizons. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you were living a certain way and then you had that epiphany, a magical moment where you suddenly, something opened your eyes, at least for a moment, and you saw a whole bigger reality. You say, wow, I can't believe that. And you never forget it. If you've never had such an experience, see me afterwards. But if you have, you know what I'm talking about. Now imagine having such an experience every day. You'd think this is once in your lifetime you have such epiphanies. Well, the only way to have such an experience every day is if you allow yourself to be led by a guide to those other worlds. The Friedrich Rebbe, when he was in prison, he had no problem going to those worlds. He knew them, he lived them all the time. As a matter of fact, I just saw a recent manuscript they just discovered that he wrote in prison. And he's writing a piece of Ayin Beis about the 3 dimensions of energy before the tzimtzum. I mean, it's mind-blowing. That's what he was thinking when he was in prison. But I related immediately. He wasn't escaping. He was going to where real reality is, because where he was not, there was nothing to look at. So he had to go to a place that he saw was true reality. In a strange way, when you're in hell, you see more reality than when you're in paradise. Because in paradise, you can get distracted by all the lights. There was nothing to look at. Like when they asked him, do you know where you are? He says, yes, I'm in a place that doesn't need a mezuzah. Which is basically a barn or a bathroom. That's how he responded. The Rebbe explains that's a way of bringing Torah even into such a place by saying it's a place where Torah says you don't need a mezuzah. It's also a mitzvah not to have a mezuzah. You know the story with Rabbi Zusha and his brother. He was arrested and in prison, and his brother got the opportunity to come see him. And he sees he's sitting there depressed. He says, didn't we learn from the Baal Shem Tov and from all the masters that you have to be joyous in any occasion? So he said, so why are you sitting so depressed? There's a reason you're here in prison. You have to find the reason. So he said, brother, I'm not depressed because of the prison. I'm depressed because it's already 2 weeks since I'm here. I can't make a blessing on the food. Because inside my cell there's a pail that we use as a bathroom. And a place in the bathroom, you're not supposed to make a blessing. So his brother says to him, but don't you know the same God that said the mitzvah to make a blessing on food said that you don't make one here. So it's also a mitzvah when you don't make a blessing. And with that, they parted ways. The visit was over. His brother Abzusha started dancing. He said, absolutely, how come he didn't think of that? He starts dancing and celebrating. Wow, he's keeping a mitzvah. And he's so excited, inside of a prison, people are pretty bored or depressed as it is. So everybody started dancing. The Jews, the non-Jews, the whole place was like one big party. The whole cells of dancing. Those angry guards come running. What are you dancing about? You bunch of miserable prisoners. They say, we don't really know, but it's something to do with the guy there in that prison. Why is he dancing? We don't really know. It's about the pail in his room. Okay, they knew it was around the pail. They didn't know what exactly. Because Rabbi asked. They asked him, why are you dancing? He says, because I have a pail in the room. But they didn't know what that meant. But so the guard, who was a real anti-Semite, runs into this prison. He says, the pail? I'm going to get rid of this pail right now and you'll stop dancing. Anyway, he got rid of the pail. So the guy started dancing even more, because then now he can make blessings. So you just see sometimes you dance for something you're lacking, you end up getting it. Just to tell you again the interesting twists of life, dissonance. So there's a way to deal with dissonance, and there's a way not to deal with it. And in Ayin Beis, what he does is he takes you on a journey into those worlds. And he does describe these 3 dimensions of energies. That's what he says. He says the first dimension is how it is in the vision of the artist, the story. The second is how the story begins to emerge, but it's still quite amorphous. And then finally is how it manifests actually in a story. And then there's, of course, the next steps, which is where the story, the books, the pages are torn, the letters are scattered, and here we are. A bunch of scattered letters in a complex world, trying to figure it out. But Chassidus gives you the map. It tells you how to retrace the steps. You got to connect the letters, back to the story, back to the source of the story, and back to the source of all stories. Isn't that simple? That should solve all your problems. Now, the question is, how do you implement it? Well, how you implement it is that you don't just relate to this, you have to begin to see it as a reality. And then you have to figure out ways to actually live that way. And one of the practical ways is that when you wake up in the morning, you have to determine that what you're doing today, at the end of the day, you have to at least have one thing that you could show that was soulful, that was not about your personal needs. Something you did for someone else, something you did for God, something you did for your soul, something that you did that was giving rather than taking. The list goes on. You can find something like that. And it has to be important to you. To suddenly say to change your whole life, no, I don't think that is so easy. But that changes because your perspective changes. What is the primary force in your life? Is it your soul or is it your body? Now, we all begin with the body. But you can become a soulful person. It comes down to how you act. It's not just meditation. It's not just theories. It's ultimately how you behave. Is it important for you to be kind to someone else? Or is that like some type of extra credit or something? Or like some extracurricular activity, a hobby, when you're in the mood of it? Maybe that should be an agenda in its own. Do it just for the sake of doing it. It doesn't have to be because it makes you feel good, or because you get points, or because you're trying to find some a favor with God, so you're making a deal. Sometimes because that's how the soul behaves. I always bring up children, because children are perfect examples. Look at children. Children, they don't do things necessarily for gain or reward. They learn that stuff from adults. Children just have a naturalness to them that we all wish we could just have. It's a naturalness. There's a certain naturalness in a child. Natural smile, natural joy. Again, till adults start screwing it up. But there's a certain just free abandon. Free abandon. And the children don't carry grudges. They don't carry all this stuff. Every time I give a blessing to a child, someone came to me today for a blessing, so I said, grow up, make sure that adults don't corrupt you. And I say that in front of the parents always. Obviously I'm talking to the parents, not to the child. The child can't control that. But that's what it comes down to. It's the greatest blessing to tell someone is that don't corrupt your children. Let them preserve their purity. It's not my own words. The Talmud says that when they build the Beis Hamikdash, everybody's supposed to participate, except one group, children. Tinei shel Beis Rabbi. It says they're not supposed to be stopped from studying because they're called Mashiach. They are the Beis Hamikdash. And it says, Al tigu b'Mashiach. Don't touch my anointed ones. Don't touch my pure ones. The pure ones that are involved in studying is building a Beis Hamikdash. So don't schlep them even to build a temple, let alone to other not such holy things. So the children are in their own category, and we can learn a lot from them. It says in Messianic times, that our hearts of the parents will return through the children. What does that mean? Through the innocence of the children, through the purity. So to go back now to the chapter, Chukas, and preparing for the next chapter, Balak. Okay, I was off by 1 week, so what? It's not so bad. What's 1 week in the scheme of the things? And anyway, next week, as I will be out of the country. I will be in Eretz Yisrael next Wednesday night, which I shall announce at the end of the class. So it's good. I'm talking about Balak anyway, covering both weeks. But the story of death in this chapter is really the story of what dies and what doesn't die. The reason that death is impure, the impurity of death, is because, from a body's perspective, there's a disconnect. What the Parah Aduma does, the red heifer does, briefly, as he explains in Ayin Beis and explained in other places in Hasidic thought, is that it connects you to the source of life. And when you're connected to the source of life, you realize that even though on one plane, on the physical plane, something died, but you realize that on another plane, nothing really died. The challenge is, how do you bring that higher plane to our plane? So, the bottom line is that the Parah Aduma has an interesting effect. It says, if you want another dissonance, it says, it purifies the impure and impurifies the pure. I like that. It's called transference, basically. It's like the story where, you help somebody else, you save their life, and in the process you end up getting hurt. Now, God forbid that should happen to anyone, but in the story of the red heifer, it says that the red heifer, its ashes, purified those that were impure. But the Kohen, the priest, who administered the red heifer, ends up being impure. The Baal Shem Tov explains this is the difference. This is the red heifer refers to pride. Pride is healthy for the unhealthy and unhealthy for the healthy. Meaning like this: when a person is unhealthy or insecure, they need pride. They need the sense of feel of self-esteem, a sense of ego, a sense of self. Because when you're beat up by life, that's exactly what you need. You need to feel strong. Friedrich Rebbe, there's a story of Rabbi Hecht. He told me the story that when he was a young student, he was told by the Friedrich Rebbe to go speak in a shul. And he was a young guy, and he was like embarrassed and said, I can't do it, I'm this, it's not for me. My older brother, they're the speakers. He had an older brother, Shlomo Zalman, and JJ, and he had brothers that were big speakers. So the Rebbe said to him, and he said in Yiddish Hebrew, he said, Anova shalebim kema, you say dase gaiva, which means displaced humility is rooted in arrogance. That's what he told him. So sometimes when we say it's not for me, I can't, it's not because we're so humble, it's because we're so arrogant. We don't want to fail, or we don't want to show that we put ourselves in a position that's not comfortable for us. Strong, as I said before, a courageous person doesn't mind being uncomfortable. I had an experience of this a few years ago. I don't know if any of you remember the comedy club story. So I was invited Christmas night, we call Nittel night, where some don't study Torah till midnight, to be part of a comedy night in Stand-Up New York, in one of these clubs here in the city. And basically it's about getting online with another 35 comedians. Everyone has a few minutes, and you have a room that is only coming for pure belly laughs. Nothing. They're not coming to study Torah or anything like that, especially Nittel night. So there we go. So for the first thing, I laughed off the whole thing. I said, it's not for me. It's ridiculous. It takes me an hour and a half just to take off in a speech. You're telling me to get up there for 10 minutes, make jokes, But then I called back the guy who invited me and said, you know what? Comfort zone time. I can't preach about getting out of the comfort zone if I don't do it myself. I like the challenge. It's the last thing I want to do, but that's what I'm going to do. Exactly what I did. And I regretted it 1,000 times, but I committed anyway, so I'm stuck, and that's it. So came the night, I had no clue what I'm going to do. I said one thing, I hope I'm called last or something, maybe the whole thing will be cancelled. All these wishful, childish hopes you have for getting yourself out of the situation. I come there, this place packed with 400 or 500 people. Were you there that night? Okay. Anyway, so they have these comedy nights, so they have a few professionals, like something like 20 professionals, and then they have 10. The theme of the night were rabbis. Okay. So most of the rabbis, to be honest, just what do they call? They blew it. They what do they call it when someone They bombed. Yeah. Oh, they bombed. No names. Not to say that when they're telling serious things they don't bomb, but the jokes definitely didn't go so well. And one rabbi became so bad he started resorting to really low, dirty jokes, which were embarrassing. They weren't even of quality, and they didn't get any laughs either, to be honest. So he didn't even get that. So then what do you got? Anyway, so this didn't build my confidence exactly, but I knew I had a challenge, and I got up. So what I did was, and finally came my turn, and you get up there, and listen, this is as frivolous as it gets. Nobody's interested in any content. For me, what bothered me was not so much telling a few jokes. I'm just not used to just doing something that's frivolous. That's just what's the point of this? Just to make people laugh. So I felt that my real challenge was, how do I get up there in 10 minutes or whatever the amount was and make people laugh, but also tell some story, something they can go away with. So what I basically did was, I concocted in my mind, I took my best jokes, first all my anti-religious jokes that I used first to just get them warmed up and comfortable with me, to see I can break the mold. And then I moved slowly into a message. But it was all through jokes. I didn't tell anything but jokes. I didn't tell, no connecting things. One joke led to the other. So my challenge was to tell what I say anyway. I know you're saying, why do I have to spend now an hour and a half and keeping you all here this evening? Why didn't I just tell those 10-minute jokes? Well, that happens, that's a surest. You need special auspicious occasions, like Little Night in the comedy club. Anyway, but the point is, you get out of your comfort zone, interesting things happen. And actually, I have to say, I did not bomb. It was pretty good. I got good laughs. And many people that I met after that have come to this class. I like that. So from jokes that were not meant to be very superficial, some things came out of it. Anyway, but I never did it again. I'm not really interested in doing it again. Now, because I could say I did it, and that's that. Next, we move to the next challenge. So if you have any challenges you'd like to present to me, I'm always open for a challenge. I never say no to a challenge. So let me know. But remember, if you dish it out, I hope you can take it too, and I hope you're also ready for challenges. So the story with the chukas is basically knowing how to go outside of yourself, which is why the actual activities around the para aduma, the offerings in the temple were all brought inside. There was a holy of holies, there was the holy. There was the mizbeach hachitzon, the outer altar where the karbonos, the offerings were brought. But it says ma'aseh para, the offering of the red heifer, had to be kol ma'aseh b'chutz. It had to all be done outside of the temple, because you're dealing with death. You're dealing with very negative stuff. But as a result of that, and while you're outside, you have to face toward the temple, like we face today toward Jerusalem when we pray, because the para aduma, in its strange way, because of the discomfort and the dissonance of death, it led them to a much deeper appreciation of life. And by seeing the death of the body, you begin to appreciate the eternity, the immortality of the soul. And the same thing in Balak, which is why everything comes from the opposites. Esav's angel, Bilam, and finally the story in the Talmud, it says Avadja was the great prophet. It's a prophet, and his prophecy was the greatest prophecies about Mashiach and the end of days. So the Talmud says, why Avadja, who was a ger, he was a convert from Edom, he came from the grandchildren of Esav, the same place where the angel came from. Why is the greatest prophecies of the Messiah, messianic prophecies, come from a person who came as a convert from the other side, so to speak? Where Isaiah, Yecheskel, Yeshaya, Yirmiyahu, others, though they hint and they talk about Mashiach, but it doesn't have it's not on the same level. And the Talmud answers with an analogy. Meneu be'aba lishde be'narga, which is an Aramaic statement that the trees of the forest are chopped down with their own wood. Which means you need the handle of an axe is made out of the wood of the tree, and that's why it has the power to knock down the tree. Essentially, it's like the essence of antibiotics or homeopathy, where you use the disease to fight the disease. And in this case, That you need one from the same substance to be able to transform that substance. Since Avadia came from a nation that caused so much pain, Esav, which later would be Edom, Rome, the Western world, that caused so much pain. The Roman Empire destroyed the temple. Jacob and Esav, when they were in their mother's womb, they were fighting because there was the dissonance and the tension. As God tells Rebecca, you have two nations inside of you that are at war with each other. When one rises, the other one will fall. So if you want transformation of that world, it has to come from that world itself. So in a strange way, Avadia is the best person to bring. It's like the person who brought the pain brings the joy. So that's why Bilam, and that's why the angel of Esav, these are all the forces that bring the greatest blessings, including the blessings, the messianic ones. It's always the dissonance that leads us to the greatest power. If you allow the dissonance to be a catalyst and a springboard. If you don't, you just let it dominate. Then it becomes an end in itself, and you just feel like the grapes, the sour grapes. Hey, the grapes are no good because I can't reach them. What you should be saying is, I can't reach them, let me find a ladder. Let me find a way to reach them. Not suddenly say, I'm going to lower my expectations, or I'm going to change the goal because I can't reach it. Just so you should feel a little better. Which is what someone insecure will do. A secure person will figure out, if you have to build a ladder, you build a ladder to heaven. You'll do whatever it takes. It's like the analogy they give of this guy who is looking for a soulmate. Okay? And how does it go? So he's driving to work one morning. He looks out the window, and he sees 3 people. One person who he sees as maybe his potential soulmate. Another person is like an older man who's very sick, and he has an attendant with him. And it looks like they need help. They're waiting for a taxi or something. And they're waving him down. They say to him, come, take us to the hospital. But he sees this woman that he senses as his potential soulmate. So what is the ethical thing to do? So most of us try to solve the problem thinking in the box. What do you do? Which one is more, Some of us will say the noble thing to do is to take the person, help him. Soulmate, forget about it. It's not as important. Other people say, what do you mean? He's waiting his whole life for a soulmate. How could he give that up? And the answer is that very few of us think of is get out of the car, stay with your potential soulmate, give the guy the keys, and let him drive your car and take the old man to the hospital. That solution most of us will not come up with. Because we're locked. It's my car. Why would I give up my car? So we're trying to figure out how I can have both, get both benefits here. Sometimes you have to think outside of the natural solution. Sometimes you have to give something up to get something else. And the moral dilemma is over. He solves all his problems. But many of us don't know how to do that. There are many blind spots like that dissonance reveals. And that dissonance, when you're feeling restless, you're feeling tense, is the greatest blessing. But you can't stay there. Because if you stay there, you're going to find a solution. Either you're going to minimize your own situation, or you're going to minimize the goal and say, okay, it's not really for me. Because you're going to find something that's going to be comfortable for you. The goal is to not to compromise on your goal, and figure out new ways to do it. Instead of saying, since I can't do it, means that it's not meant to be. Or since I can't do it, means that the thing is worthless. When you're challenged by someone that you respect, and cares about you, that you don't like what they're saying, it's easy to just say they don't get you, or dismiss it, or try to look for somebody who'll just agree with you. Or maybe worthwhile to maybe start thinking maybe there's another way to look at it. If you don't have that courage to be able to do what I just suggested, where do you think it's going to come from? Where's the change going to come from? Expecting what God is going to suddenly do something for you differently? He's going to force you to listen to something that you don't like? Nobody can force you. So, the fact that we have these dissonances is actually a blessing in disguise, because it's telling you there's something for you to achieve, something for you to accomplish. Now obviously you can say, well, what does that mean? That any situation I can conquer? Well, that's why you have objective people. Some people will tell you, listen, do this, this, and this. After you've tried everything possible, you could say, look, I did what I can do. This guy, let's say, gives up his car and goes outside and dates this girl, and ends up being not his soulmate. Okay, nothing to regret. He did his best. But you have to be ready to go beyond what is the comfortable scenario. So there you have it. Dissonance, Ayin Beis, Chukas, Balok. Who's counting? And above all, the lesson to our lives, that hopefully tomorrow morning, as one of the Chassidim would say, every morning he gets up, he hopes that today will be better than yesterday. Now, I know we all hope that, but let's do something about it. By resolving to actually act a little differently. Find a soulful thing to do. You don't have to wait till tomorrow. You can start tonight if you like. And it's pretty easy to do today, especially with the internet. We're all texting each other. There's emails. There's all kinds of ways. We're sending messages. So maybe smuggle in one of those messages should have one that doesn't really have an agenda except a kind word. When you do kind things, you become a kinder person. Think of it that way. You don't have to wait to become a kinder person before you do kind things. So, on that happy note, I would like to sum up and say that God should bless all of us, that our dissonance, the power of our dissonance, we should use dissonance as being a springboard, a catalyst for great change. And as I see you all, there's no doubt that you could all look better, be better, and far greater than you think you could ever be. We have potential waiting to be released, and it's up to you. No one else can really release your story, because your story is your own. You have to just know how to start gathering the letters, and maybe look for people that could help you understand your own narrative, with all its bizarre twists and turns, and learn to take the past and turn it into chapters that lead you into a bright future. Amen. And before I conclude, let me just say a few announcements. Philip, you're giving your class tomorrow evening? Yes, Philip is giving his class. I want to introduce Philip to someone. We'll introduce you after the class. Remind me. And that's tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Philip will tell you all the details. Philip, is worthwhile going to Philip's class. He has a very unique style. Melds together all his story of his life with spirituality and all the different things that he's experienced. Next week, here's the story of next week. Next week, physically, I do not think I will be here unless there's a miracle, because my plan is to be in the Holy Land, where I'm going for a few days, for a week. So it's only next week. I will not physically be here, but I will be recording a class, so there will be something online. But if you want to see me physically, you have to come to Jerusalem. So you're all welcome. I'll be leaving Tuesday night. If anybody wants me to say a special prayer for them at the wall or any other holy place there, please let me know. Just give me a note with the name. If you want me to give any charity there for you, I'm more happy to do that as well. And so I said the class will not be in any physical location. We'll have it recorded. The title of next week's class, I forgot what it is. Yes, it's Independence Day. It's for July 4th. So I believe the title is Are You Independent? Okay. Are you? Anybody? And then we will resume the week afterwards. The location and details shall forthcoming. And finally, please leave me your email address if you haven't. And I do give this Ayin Beis class every morning. It's heavy duty stuff, but it's all translated and hopefully pretty clear. I hear from people that tell me they listen to it, that it's legible. And it's every day we post another YouTube video and a YouTube channel, also ayinbeis.com. And it's really meant to be a collaborative effort. So if you have any thoughts on these matters that parallel with your own life, whether it's in art, in music, in science, in education, in therapy, I would love to see the parallels of these Ayin Beis ideas interacting, cross-pollinating with other ideas. So please don't be bashful and just share anything you have to share. And we also have this Club 72, which is a weekly email for now, until we develop it into further activities, which is like a summary of the weekly discourse delivered 100 years ago. So this week would be Chukas and so on. And I welcome you to that journey. The bottom line is, the more you journey in the spiritual realms, the less trouble you're going to get into, and the more freedom you'll have. Simple as that. Thank you very much.